To understand Pluto, which is the underlying foundation of a soul, showing its deep and unconscious desires, we must first isolate the axis of Pluto, and its polarity point PPP, which is always located 180 degrees away from Pluto. As we isolate this axis, we can gain a deep understanding of the theme, making out the undercurrent that is normally hidden in an individual's life. PPP is always the cause of Pluto's desires, hence the Pluto placement in a chart describes the effect of PPP. So what does the PPP reveal about this chart? 1. PPP conjunct Mercury. This is crucial. Pluto's unconscious desires, and their point of development, are directly connected to consciousness. This means, obsessions must be understood, relational patterns must be conceptualized, intensity must be verbalized, the shadow must be thought through. This is not a soul that can feel its way through Pluto's matter, it must understand it mentally. Since Mercury is chart ruler in first house in opposition to Pluto, this becomes an evolutionary requirement. Relational intensity must become conscious through language and self-observation. PPP conjunct Mercury means that Pluto's darkness must not remain subconscious. It must enter the first house, into identity, into consciousness. This ties directly into self versus other axis Aries/Libra interception, the broken balance. 2. PPP trine Neptune/Uranus. Here it gets even deeper. Pluto's evolutionary point is in harmonious relation to Neptune, collective unconscious, source, dissolution, Uranus, individual unconscious, cyclical awakening, higher mind. This means Pluto's obsessive desires are fundamentally connected to something greater than personal will. There is an intuitive knowing of relational truth, karmic necessity, soul timing. PPP trine Uranus. Insight can liberate obsession. PPP trine Neptune. Surrender can dissolve compulsion. This is important. Pluto here is not just extreme. There is a higher intelligence behind the intensity. But 3. PPP square Mars. Now comes the real friction. Mars is the doer. Mars is the expressor. Mars is the one who acts out both Venus' desires and Pluto's unconscious drive. PPP square Mars means action is not automatically in line with the soul's deeper developmental point. There can be overreacting passion taking over, impulsive relational intensity, drama. In the 5th Leo expression, Mars in 5th Leo wants to express authentically, but PPP says the action must align with conscious transformation, not with raw intensity. This connects directly to Saturn-Mars quincunx, ontological exclusion. Pluto-Mercury opposition intercepted Aries. Mars can act out Pluto's desires without understanding them. PPP requires that the action first become conscious. The whole. What does this mean for the soul? The PPP dynamic shows Pluto doesn't just want to transform relationships. Pluto wants relational intensity to 1. Be understood, Mercury. 2. Be integrated into self, first house. 3. Be harmonized with higher insight, Uranus. 4. Be resolved through conscious surrender, Neptune. 5. Not just acted out impulsively, Mars square. This is extremely central. That makes Pluto even more significant than just an aretic crisis in 7th. It shows that the relational crisis is a work of consciousness, not just a passionate struggle. Since PPP is connected to Mercury and Uranus, is it possible that the real resolution lies not in finding the right partner first, but in understanding the dynamics of the relationship conceptually? There we can begin to see how Uranus and the nodes could one day meet. Insight in the 6th North Node, self-mastery, can correct the entire broken axis. PPP conjunct Mercury means that Pluto's darkness must not remain subconscious. It must enter the first house, into the self, into consciousness, the newborn fire, the existential I am. After understanding the theme of Pluto versus PPP, the natural order in evolutionary astrology is to get a grip on the lunar nodes, which describes the direction of the ego. This soul uses its traditional modus operandi. The lunar nodes describes how Pluto's obsessive desires are normally being solved. The instinctual solution gravitates towards deep habitual patterns, the subconscious mind. This is the South Lunar Node, aka Key 2. South Node often leads to behaviors of autonomous character. These are not reflected upon. For the individual to evolve, it's usually advised to focus on the North Lunar Node, as a more reflected and conceptual attitude, which both lets the soul evolve as well as it avoids the cataclysmic changes that Pluto often brings into a life. In this particular chart we have a situation where one planet, Uranus, is squaring the lunar nodes. This is usually called a skipped step, which means that instead of having only the south lunar node overemphasized, both nodes are well developed, but is blocked in its evolution due to this conflict with the squaring planet. In such a chart, the individual must develop an awareness about this conflict, what it means, and to consciously work towards a solution for this conflict. The lunar nodes in this chart is 12th house Taurus south node and 6th house Scorpio north node, but as I just wrote, in this chart, a solution to these skipped steps is crucial. Instead of aiming for identification with the north node, I will get into the details of this further into this report. The resolution node means what node can solve the conflict with the squaring planet. In this chart, the resolution node is the north node in 6th house Scorpio, which means in short, deep intimate bonding, through daily routines, i.e. Uranus can make peace with the nodal axis through an awareness between its theme, and the north node, and its theme. Both themes can evolve once an understanding between these two energies becomes highlighted by an attitude of awareness brought to attention, so the two intentions no longer clashes. The soul's existential dynamics, self versus other. At the core of this chart lies the intercepted and fractured Aries Libra axis, reflecting the soul's profound tension between self and other. An intercepted axis means that the natural communication between two opposite signs is broken, making the actual theme work in a fractured way, blocking energies from meeting in balance. Signs act in excess or in a non-sufficient way. This intercepted Aries Libra axis is placed in 6th, 12th house, which makes it extra difficult. A deeper explanation will be made separately. Pluto in anaretic degree 29 degrees Scorpio in the 7th house magnifies this field of relational intensity, emphasizing the soul's confrontation with desire, obsession, and relational depth. The broken axis raises a question whether this rupture is deliberately created by the soul as an intentional intensification of relational crisis, or if it's just a failure in dealing with relationships. The anaretic degree, as well as the phase relationship between Pluto and Mars, tells a story about a soul with great wisdom in the area of deep and intimate relationships. Mars in 5th house Leo expresses authentic action and instinctive energy, yet it moves in tandem with Venus' conscious desires and Pluto's hidden, obsessive drives, manifesting through the field of relational engagement. Mercury in 1st house Gemini, one of the chart rulers together with Venus and Sun, works closely with Mars archetypally based on the house. First equals Mars archetype, processing the soul's instinctive impulses through thought, observation, and communication. Moon in 3rd house Cancer supports this cognitive emotional synthesis, translating intuition into awareness and insight. The Sun-Uranus axis further adds depth and complexity. The Sun in 12th house channels dreams, solitude, and collective unconsciousness, while Uranus closely conjunct Neptune represents cyclical, individually unconscious energy, both of which collide with Saturn's linear, structured influence in 11th house Pisces. Saturn, the chain ruler. The term chain ruler is something I use personally, and is a label given to the planet which have the most central key position in a specific chart, is sextile Neptune in 10th and quincunx Mars, producing ontological exclusion between action and structure. Neptune, ruling over the 12th house, embodies the source where Venus is intercepted, the form that shapes the desires Mars seeks to enact. This chart presents a network of dynamic relational tensions. Mars, Venus, Pluto, instinct, conscious desire, and hidden obsession converge in the relational realm. Pluto, Mercury, mind wrestles with depth and transformation, translating instinctive and relational experience into understanding. Sun, Uranus versus Saturn, cyclical unconscious flow challenges linear, conceptual reality. Intercepted Aries Libra, the axis of self versus other is broken, producing concentrated relational intensity and a profound lesson in balance. The soul's work is to navigate these interwoven forces, seeking integration of instinct, desire, intellect, and relational depth. Pluto ensures transformative intensity, Mars expresses authentic action, Venus reflects the forms of desire, Mercury provides clarity of thought, Moon channels emotional cognition, and Saturn and Uranus mediate the tension between form and flow. The challenge lies in discovering how the soul can reconcile the fractured axis, engage authentically with others, and bring the intercepted energies into relational and self-mastery. Pluto in 7th house Scorpio operates through its hidden, obsessive desires, the core drives of the soul that seek completion, merging, and the resolution of relational imbalance. Its polarity point, PPP, reveals the source of these unconscious cravings, the ultimate why behind Pluto's intensity, a need to understand how self and other can meet authentically, beyond mere projection or habitual patterns. In this chart, Pluto's work in opposition to Mercury and under the mentorship of Jupiter highlights a guided confrontation with these hidden forces, ensuring the soul is not simply acting out obsession, but being led toward conceptual and relational mastery. When PPP is conjunct Mercury in the first house, and Mercury is the chart ruler, Pluto's unconscious material cannot remain subterranean. It is not meant to stay in projection, 7th house. It is not meant to live solely in relational crisis. It must move, from other into self, from projection into core identity, from compulsion into conscious authorship. The first house is not just self, it is the ignition of incarnation, the spark of separateness, the newborn Aries fire archetype, even if Aries itself is intercepted elsewhere. So PPP conjunct Mercury here means, Pluto's darkness must become self-aware at the level of core identity. Not just I understand my relational patterns, but I recognize that this intensity is mine. I see how my desire shapes reality. I own the fire. This is crucial because Pluto in 7th can easily externalize the obsessive partner, the karmic lover, the intense other. But PPP conjunct Mercury in the first says, the transformation must occur inside the self, inside the core, inside the initiating flame, and this connects directly to the fractured Aries-Libra axis. If the axis is broken between self and other, PPP conjunct Mercury is the revolutionary mechanism that pulls the energy back into self so balance can eventually be restored. This is not about becoming less intense, it is about becoming consciously intense. Now here is something subtle and powerful, because Mercury works archetypally with Mars, first house resonance, and Mars is square the PPP, the instinctive fire must be re-educated by conscious awareness. Mars wants to act, PPP says. First become aware of what drives the action. That is a profound evolutionary instruction. Here is a reflection. Does PPP conjunct Mercury actually represent the soul reclaiming the broken Aries principle through consciousness? That would tie the entire chart together. 1. Pluto in the 7th. Relationship as evolutionary necessity. Pluto in Scorpio in the 7th house does not ask, do I want relationship? It asks, what is relationship at its deepest level? Why must self encounter other? What is transformed when two consciousnesses meet? Pluto here does not seek companionship, it seeks evolutionary confrontation. Relationship is not optional, it is required for transformation, but Pluto alone does not explain why relationship is structurally necessary. That is where Jupiter enters too. Jupiter in the 7th, meaning maker of relationship. Jupiter in the 7th is not merely about good partners, it is about interpreting relational experience, extracting meaning from encounter, understanding the philosophy of union. If Pluto is the intensity, Jupiter is the one asking, what is the law behind this? What principle makes relationship necessary? If Pluto drives the soul into relational crisis, Jupiter tries to understand the purpose of that crisis. And here is the key. If PPP is conjunct Mercury in the first, then understanding relationship becomes a function of self-awareness. Not, I must find the right person, but I must understand why the other exists in my psychic architecture. That is radically different. 3. The highlighted insight. Conceptual resolution before a relational resolution. The highlighted idea suggests something subtle but powerful. Resolution may not begin externally, it may begin cognitively. Since PPP is conjunct Mercury, self-awareness, PPP trines Uranus, higher insight, PPP trines Neptune, transpersonal surrender, the transformation may occur first in consciousness. This links directly to North Node in the 6th, self-mastery in daily life, not dramatic relational fusion, but integration in practice, integration in routine, integration in behavior. The fractured Aries-Libra axis is not healed by dramatic partnership alone. It is healed when the self understands its own relational mechanism. Only then can partnership become conscious rather than compulsive. 4. Uranus and the nodes. Future integration. Uranus will one day meet the North Node. Symbolically, this is immense. Uranus represents insight, higher pattern recognition, the correction of outdated structure. Saturn, the nodes represent evolutionary direction. If Uranus meets the North Node in the 6th, insight meets self-mastery, and that could be the moment when the soul understands relational polarity without needing to dramatize it. That is not anti-relationship, it is post-compulsion relationship. 5. So is Jupiter guided by Pluto? Yes, but in a very specific way. Pluto pushes, Jupiter interprets. Pluto creates the crisis, Jupiter seeks the meaning behind the crisis. and PPP conjunct Mercury ensures that the meaning must be integrated into the self, not projected outward, which brings us back to the core theme, self versus other. Perhaps relationship is required not to complete the self but to reveal the structure of self, and perhaps the ultimate resolution is, when the self understands why it seeks the other, that is when the axis can rebalance. The age of Aquarius Saturnian epoch, top-down reality. Saturn represents structure, authority, linear time, institutional consensus, top-down narratives, collective agreement about what is real. In a Saturn-dominant paradigm, identity is shaped externally. You become who the structure permits you to be. Reality flows from institution, culture, family. Individual form precedes experience. Uranian, Aquarian shift, inside-out reality. Uranus, especially in its Aquarian expression, represents individuated consciousness, inner signal over outer authority, innovation, cyclical rather than linear time, decentralization, living systems rather than rigid hierarchies. In this paradigm, identity arises from internal alignment. Reality flows from individual signal. Creative expression. Networked resonance. Flow precedes form. And now the chart makes even more sense. Your chart's core conflict, Uranus versus Saturn, flow versus form, cyclical versus linear, self-author consciousness versus consensus reality. This is not just personal tension, it mirrors a collective transition. The fractured Aries-Libra axis, self versus other, becomes especially relevant in an Aquarian age because, when external structures weaken, self-definition intensifies. If the self is not internally integrated, relationship becomes chaotic. So the evolutionary demand becomes, develop self-awareness strong enough to relate freely, not through Saturnian obligation, but through conscious choice. PPP conjunct Mercury in the first, now seen through this lens. Pluto's unconscious relational intensity must move into the self. Why? Because in a Uranian paradigm, projection collapses. You cannot outsource shadow to the other. You must own your psychic material. PPP conjunct Mercury suggests transformation through conscious self-recognition, which is exactly aligned with an Aquarian shift, from external authority to internal awareness. But notice the subtlety. Uranus in this chart is not free of Saturn. They are in mutual reception. They are entangled. They rule each other. This is important. The future is not Saturn disappears. It is structure must serve flow. Form must serve consciousness. That is far more sophisticated than rebellion. So what might this mean for this soul? This soul may be living ahead of the curve, carrying the tension between old structural reality, Saturn, emerging individual flow. Uranus and the relational crisis. Pluto 29 degrees Scorpio 7th, forces the question, can you relate from inner sovereignty rather than inherited structure? If so, then, relationship becomes chosen resonance, not karmic compulsion. That would indeed reflect an Aquarian evolution.